everyone. I'm Rev Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at this center, and it's always my joy to start us off for the month. And so this month's topic is becoming a spiritual activist. Do we have any spiritual activists in the house right now today? Anyone? Anyone? A few? A couple hands? Woohoo! Okay. Well, for how some of you might be going, ugh, what's the reaction when you hear that word activist, spiritual activist? Anybody having a reaction to that word? It's okay, you don't have to raise your hand. Same person that raised their hand and said they were. You could possibly be having a positive response, like, okay, it's time to get that going. Or you could be going, oh no, what's Reverend Bonnie up to this morning? Where are we headed? Well, I thought I'd share with you where I got the idea, first of all, and it's from the Science of Mind magazine in June of last year. And it's an interview with Gary Zukav. And in this he said, I realized that I could spend my life as an activist against this or that, or I could do what I'm doing now, devoting my life to transforming the consciousness that produces these heinous and destructive things. And then he said, and the only place I can change that consciousness is in myself. That means changing what I intend to create from an external power, the ability to manipulate and control in order to feel safe and valuable, to an authentic power, to create with the intentions of the soul, harmony, cooperation, sharing, and reverence for life. When you do that, you become a spiritual activist. He continues to say, when you become a spiritual activist, you can be an environmental activist without hating the timber industry. You can be a civil rights activist without hating people who are still controlled by fear, prejudice, and bigotry. You can become a women's rights activist without making men into villains. You can become an activist without making anyone into a villain or looking at anyone as a victim, including yourself. You move through the world with an empowered heart without attachment to the outcome. Ernest Holmes said, we should stand for something and against nothing. And that's one of those phrases that's tucked away, so far away that I couldn't find the exact page. I looked for it for quite a while, but I've read it over and over, and it's one of those phrases from him that has caused me to really do a lot of thinking. What does it mean to stand for something and against nothing? And what does that have to do with being a spiritual activist? Well, I looked up the term activism just to see exactly in the dictionary what that means. And of course, the first definition is the one we're the most familiar with and probably gets some of that reaction from us. Policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. But underneath there, as you keep reading definitions, there's a section called philosophy. And the first entry under philosophy, and this is still under activism, a theory that the essence of reality is pure activity, especially spiritual activity or process. Did you know that was there? The second entry, a theory that the relationship between the mind and the objects of perception depends upon the action of the mind. Sounds like Science of Mind in the dictionary to me. Another definition for activism, the attitude of taking an active part in events, especially in a social context. At the conference that 4 of us got to go to and have returned from, it was, I think, 2 weeks ago now, we were able to listen to a panel of ministers talk about what's happening at their churches, because the theme of a world that works for everyone is a theme that was presented to all of us as something that we could use throughout this year. And they actually have pre-written sermons that we could use if we wanted them. So the people that were presenting were using the outlined forms that had been presented to them and sharing how that was working in their churches. One of the people that shared was Reverend Petra Weldris from the Dallas Center for Spiritual Living, and she's pretty well known in the movement, so some of you might have heard of her. And one of the things she talked about is that as they used these resources and as they talked about creating a world that works for everyone, they started creating those spiritual living circles, like what we have started here on Thursday mornings. And as they continued to talk about a world that works for everyone, 2 new circles started up, one for African Americans and one for people who speak Spanish. And she said then people in her congregation started saying, wait a minute, if we're all one, why are we having special groups for this group of people and special groups for that group of people? She pointed out that when it was a men's group and a women's group, people didn't tend to get quite as triggered by that creation. And so she said her congregation has been going through some really deep discussions about what that means and how that can be of service and where that community is going as they continue to work on this larger vision of creating a world that works for everyone. And some of the people started to say, well, this is feeling like it's bordering on the political. And that isn't what people wanted when they showed up at the center. And I know here we have a variety of speakers every Sunday that address the same topic for the month. And sometimes what we hear from up here, people go, that felt a little political, and some people aren't comfortable with what they hear. And then I come out of a background where I was taught the personal is political. I can't separate my person from the political. Just living as I live is a political statement. That's what I was taught. And so when I read into Reverend Petra in the bookstore there at the conference, I asked her, how do you handle this? How do you address this issue in your congregation? And her answer to me was, when you're moving into the political is when you're standing up there telling your congregation how to vote. I'm not going to try and do that. It's also when you tell people what to do, what they have to do with who they are. And I'm also not about doing that. So spiritual activism is about activating your spirit so that you can express your personalized expression of the one in the world, for the purpose of spiritual evolution and growth for yourself and those around you and in your community. And how that looks, what's activating in you, and how you bring that into the community, that's between you and your understanding of spirit. That's not something I'm going to try and tell you what to do from here. And the other thing that I know is that if you ever hear someone up here trying to tell you that, I know that every single one of us has the ability to discern what we're listening to anywhere, whether it's on this platform, whether it's in the media, whether it's between friends, in a class. And so I know that, as Gary Zukav said, we don't need to move into anger, judgment, or victimization when we hear anything. We can move into our spiritually activated self. So now that hopefully I've gotten some of those hot buttons out of the way, some of those words that could maybe activate a response, what is it that we teach? What is it that we encourage you and myself to think about or do from here? Well, first of all, I've already mentioned to stand for something and against nothing. I just encourage you this month to contemplate that sentence. That's sometimes not easy to do. So what I think Holmes is saying, and what we've heard many teachers say, is that where we put our focus is the key. And our focus is also referred to by Ernest Holmes as our mental equivalent. That's a term that also took me a while to grasp in this movement. Mental equivalent is what it is we can actually see in our mind's eye. If we can imagine it, it can be. If you think about all the things created in the world, you had to imagine it first before it could be created. So that's where we put our focus, is what it is we want to see, what created in the world. And so also at the conference, we had a workshop that emphasized the importance of where we put our focus. And they showed us a video that I want to share with you today, thanks to the technical expertise of Larry. And so when you watch this video, it's very short. Hopefully you all from over there can see it. What? Skip, yeah, can you? What I want you to do is focus on how many times the ball is being passed from a person in a white t-shirt to another person in a white t-shirt. And there's people on 2 teams, I guess. They have black t-shirts and white t-shirts. So I want you to count how many times the person pushes the ball or passes the ball from a white t-shirted person to another white t-shirted person. Got it? Okay, can you turn it off? Okay, so how many did you count? 12, 15, 13, 14, 15, anything more than 15? Now, how many of you saw the gorilla walk through the middle of the game? Oh, about 3 of you, 3 or 4? Okay, I'll let you know I didn't see it either the first time. So Larry's going to play it again, maybe, hopefully, if he can get it up again. Yeah. And this time I want you to watch for the gorilla that walks through the middle of the game. Thank you, Larry. That's it. Good. So I have a question for you. How many of you didn't see the gorilla because you're against gorillas and think they're bad? Well, when I saw that, I was stunned. Because when they said, how many of you saw the gorilla? Sometimes when people ask me a question like that, my mind can kind of replay it and I can see it and go, oh yeah, I just didn't pay attention. But it was not in my memory banks at all. It wasn't there. And so my first reaction to that was literally a bit of fear and disbelief. Because for whatever reason in my life, one of the things I am most unreasonably afraid of is a person in a gorilla suit. For whatever reason, somebody in a gorilla mask. And my brother is the same way. I don't know why. But when I realized that gorilla person walked right through that game and I didn't even see it, my first thought was, how many times am I that close to a gorilla and I don't even know it? At what point am I so oblivious because of what I'm focused on that I don't see something that I need to see? So that was my first reaction, was to kind of get a little freaked by this experience and think, oh my goodness, how is it that I missed that sort of important piece of information? Well, then the second thing I realized as I kept thinking about it was the gorilla really didn't hurt anybody. It didn't stop the flow of the game. They just kept right on going. And so maybe I really don't need to see the gorilla after all. Maybe it's okay to just sort of let some things pass through my life without my engagement or without my attention, if they don't disrupt the flow, if they're not disrupting what it is I'm trying to do or where I'm trying to get in my life. So that was the second place I went. Then the third place I went is I realized that once I saw the gorilla, I've not been able to not see it again. So every time I've seen it since, by bringing it up and finding it on the internet, I see the gorilla. And so then I had to ask myself, well, what do we do? Once we see the so-called gorilla that might be showing up in our life, and I'm using the gorilla now as a metaphor for maybe something we don't like, an experience we don't want to have, a situation we maybe don't want to be in. How do we handle that once we've already seen it? It's not like we can just keep playing the game and it's not there and it doesn't impact us anymore. So what do we do? How do we, with this teaching, deal with those gorillas that walk through our life or show up in our space? Well, when I was raising my son, we played a game that was called Stop, Look, and Listen. And I know many of us who have had children taught our children as they cross the street to stop, look, and listen. And the game is not just about physical safety, where you would stop, look, and listen, but it's also about emotions and how, when they're getting engaged, if a child is being engaged in a situation that they're not comfortable with, how to use that idea of stop, look, and listen to handle the situation. And so for me, I realized that one of the first things that I need to do when I'm engaging or being engaged by or seeing the gorilla is to stop. This is the sign for stop. It works for me. Stop. Stop, and then look within. And often when we say look within, we close our eyes to look within to that heart space and listen again to our heart space. And as I was doing that, I had this idea of going like this with my earlobe. And that is turning on that light, pulling the light switch, turning it on. So you can use that if you want. Pull that as you need to stop, look within, listen, and turn on the light. Because Ernest Holmes says we can control our conditions in such a degree as we are successful in looking away from the conditions which now exist while expecting something else. So that's that looking within is a way to look away from or not paying attention to the gorilla. And then the listening, Holmes also says, love points the way, law makes the way possible. So to me, as we look at our heart space, if we go within to that heart space where we can connect with the loving part of who we are, and we turn on that inner light, it can pave the way and make that way possible. So why look within? Well, first of all, another thing that we teach is that anything that shows up out here tends to be a mirror for something that's going on in here. So the first thing when I see that gorilla is I think about how is the gorilla expressing in and through me in the world? Whatever it is I am maybe not liking, how is that being expressed by me? So that comes with the looking within. And again, lovingly. And the second reason, I think, to look within when we close our eyes is we can start to visualize that mental equivalent, as Holmes calls it, that visualization of what it is we want to move toward. Now, I know sometimes I can disengage from a situation out here, but I'm still engaged up here. I'm still having dialogue up here. I'm still arguing up here. I'm still proving my point up here, whether the person or situation is in front of me. And it can be anything. I argue with, politicians. I argue with the person that I see standing by the side of the road. And I've had to quiet that argumentative part of me that's going on up here and ask myself over and over, what do I want to experience? So I can start visualizing that experience going the way I want it. A peaceful expression of who I am. So to me, that's part of why the stopping, looking within, and listening. And then I can listen to what's being created in my mental equivalent. Now, suppose that gorilla is just so big, it's sitting right on your lap, and you just cannot see anything but the gorilla. Then what do? Well, another one of the conference workshops, the man had written a book, and I'm thinking we'll probably get it, called Emergence. And in there, he was talking about the fact that there's really nothing to fix. There's nothing to fix. We don't have to fix the gorilla out there. We don't have to fix the gorilla in here. What we need to do is allow our true self to emerge, to allow the peace that's really intended for every interaction between us and another to emerge. It's allowing ourselves to move to a place of emergence, that true nature. And once we get there, that's where the action can start taking place, when action is emerging out of our true nature. The other thing we teach is that we move toward something and not run away from something. That we want to be moving toward what it is we want to see or experience and not run away and look back over our shoulder at the gorilla, whatever it is. We're looking forward toward what we really want to experience. And again, that's how it is that we stand for something. Our focus is on that as opposed to being against something else. In our practitioner class on Tuesday, we were talking about that, what all of you I'm sure have heard, the glass is half empty or the glass is half full, and how difficult it is sometimes to see the glass half full, that some people still are seeing the glass half empty. And so I was thinking about that, and so I was imagining, okay, I have one of those things that holds 4 cups that you can measure with, a measuring cup. glass. So I was picturing that filled halfway, so it's 2 cups. And I thought, okay, whether the glass is half full or half empty, I still have 2 cups. So what's the point? Either way you look at it, you have 2 cups. Well, what I realized is that how we experience those 2 cups changes depending on whether we see the glass half full or half empty. If we're focused on the top part that doesn't have anything in it, and we're going, oh, I don't have that, I'm in lack, I don't have enough, then what I'm going to get, because we get more of what we focus on, is more I don't have, I don't have, I don't have. But if we can focus on the 2 cups that we start out with, where we are right now with what we have, if we can move into gratitude around those 2 cups and say, I have 2 cups, then what we focus on grows, and I have, and I have, and I have, and I have more things to be grateful for. So yeah, we might all start out with 2 cups, but how we focus and where we put our focus is going to change that experience and how it is that experience evolves into the future. So if you're not sure like how this works, or if you're still struggling with seeing the glass half empty instead of half full, I would suggest joining us in that class tomorrow night, Prosperity Plus, because in that class we spend 10 weeks learning and practicing and working how this works. And it's not just about money. Money is one of those tangible things we can count, like 2 cups. But we see how that principle spreads into all areas of our life, how it is that we can handle and work with all things that show up. So I just encourage you to join us if you want to see how that works. So again, we're talking about being a spiritual activist. And so far I've been talking about the spiritual practice that goes into that before there's any action that takes place. The spiritual practice of stopping, looking, listening, turning on the light, creating that new mental equivalent, and then embracing whatever it is that showed up. So where are some places that we could use this? Where are some places we could take our spiritual activism? The job, I could read her lips. Yes, on the job, where else? Everywhere. The board meetings here, any meeting that you go to, Facebook, traffic, family, strangers, any new situation and any familiar situation where you want to evolve it, where you want to have that experience of spirit expressing. So how do we do it then? What are we doing? We're listening, we're stopping the engagement in what we don't want, looking within, listening, holding that consciousness, doing a quick self-assessment, seeing whether the gorilla should just pass right on through without any engagement or whether we need to embrace it. Seeing the God or the good in everyone. So yes, spirit is expressing all the time. Spirit is all activity. Spiritual activism is that consciousness that we bring to how it is spirit expresses through us in the world. And so I have one final thought for you all. If focusing on the glass being half full as opposed to half empty is difficult for you, or is a challenge, or is something you haven't even considered, if taking these steps to look at those things in our life and finding a different way to respond or be with them seems different or new, this is not about making the old wrong or bad. I was thinking about our cell phones. Did the cell phones make the dial-up phones wrong? Is the car that we're driving today making the horse and buggy wrong? That's not what it's about. It's about the evolution of what's great into something greater. And that's what I think Gary Zukav is talking about when he's talking about a spiritual activist. We're looking at where we are, we're seeing the greatness in it, and we're allowing it to evolve into something greater. So I invite you all to embrace your spiritual activist. Let him or her out so that we can have more light in the world and more conscious spiritual expression and activity in the world. And if you get triggered along the way, take a moment to stop, look within, listen, pull that earlobe, turn on the light, create your new mental equivalent. And if that gorilla is just too big, it's sitting in your lap, give it a great big hug, embrace it, and call me in the morning. In actuality, if it feels too big to handle it on your own, call someone. Call a prayer partner, call a practitioner, call a minister, join a class, get with people who can help you figure out how it is to start focusing on what it is you do want in your life. And ultimately, free up that spiritual activist so we can create that world that works for everyone in whatever way you feel called to express it. And so it is. So it is.